Next up, we have a fireside chat, panel discussion. This is all about democratising sustainability from data to intelligence. And we have two speakers, as you can see, both from the Sustainability Group. Alex Smith is the co-founder and a partner of the Sustainability Group, and Alex co-leads the development of both the consultancy practice and the SaaS platform Future Plus, which is a sustainability measurement and management tool that makes sustainability accessible, achievable, and affordable. Very important, that last point. Mike Penrose is the co-founder and a partner of the Sustainability Group. And prior to this, among other roles, Mike has been Executive Director of UNICEF UK, Global Humanitarian Director at Save the Children, an advisor and committee member of FTSE for Good, a UK government humanitarian and conflict advisor, and a director in his spare time at a world-renowned commercial risk management firm. So yes, a packed CV there. So please welcome Alex and Mike. Okay, and before we get started, I suppose you should tell us a bit more about the Sustainability Group, what you guys do.
Yeah, so Mike and I co-founded the Sustainability Group about 3 years ago. We came together on a project we were working and realised we were very aligned in our values, and had a bit of a light bulb moment that we thought that sustainability should be much more accessible for companies of all sizes, sectors and geographies to understand what it is that understand what sustainability was, understand what it was to their business model, and be able to measure it, manage it, improve it, and report it.
And it was very much our vision that sustainability is much wider than a lot of the very narrow themes and verticals that it's currently measured in. So we look at sustainability across 5 themes, which is climate, environment, diversity and inclusion, economic and social impact, because there's so many interrelationships between those 5 themes. Okay, and do you think that that companies were not getting that, or not really appreciating what sustainability means? Absolutely. Yeah. What we found is we were going to lots of different. We started off just doing baseline consultancy, and this was before we developed Future Plus, and we saw common themes the whole time in companies that sustainability was either defined in a very theoretical or academic way, or it was sat in a very, very tight vertical. So you go in and people say, yes, we're doing sustainability net zero. Great, but if you don't look at, for example, some of the environmental impact of poor carbon sequestration, you're having a catastrophic impact on the environment. If you're not looking at some of the social drivers of individual carbon emissions as well as business carbon emissions, you're also not really getting the point, and you'll never be able to tackle it.
I think as well that there's also a lot of good intent, but what we found particularly with startups and SMEs, and even sort of going into sort of medium-sized companies, is there's often not the knowledge, the resource or the time to understand what sustainability meant to them outside of what they were doing on their day-to-day roles. So we wanted to find a way to be that outside expert that could go in and sort of take that weight and give them a real guidance and education on what it is that they need to be looking at as they're growing their business, and sort of inculcating that into their sustainability, into their business decisions as sustainable decisions rather than their business decisions and then thinking about what sustainability meant to them.
Okay, all right. Well, let's dive into this then. And so, Mike, lots of industries have been talking about the value and power of data for years. Has the world of sustainability and ESG been keeping up?
I would say no. There is no shortage of data out there. There's huge amounts of data, pools of it all over the place. But there's a very distinct difference between data and intelligence. And in the classic conventional definition, intelligence is data to which analysis has been applied. And what we found is people are making a lot of decisions based on lots of information, but very little intelligence as to what that means, as Alex was saying, to their business model. So huge pools of it, not much intelligence coming off the end.
Okay. But what does the sustainability data ecosystem look like now? And what are some of the weaknesses that exist in traditional sustainability data providers and stamps of certification?
It's really interesting. This is where we viewed the biggest gap. The vast majority of solutions at the moment that help people understand what sustainability is, bring it to life in their business, and use it as a decision-making tool. It either exists for listed markets, so you've got these, big data providers for listed markets, who the predominant, and having worked on an advisory committee of one, the predominant thing you get out is negative screening, which is really important, but an absence of bad does not necessarily equate to being good or progressive as an organisation. And we found the majority of the big data providers, pretty much what they offered was negative screening. So it was an ability to assess whether, especially from an investment perspective, because a lot of this is driven towards the financial markets, whether the organisation was having a negative effect or had any reputational risk embedded within it. And as you know, we've seen within that ecosystem, some providers have to come out and say, we don't actually measure sustainability. We measure a market's reaction to what you are reporting in terms of sustainability. And that, again, does not equate to incentivizing or pushing organisations forward. It's a risk management tool. On the other end, and you said earlier, the stamps of validation that you get, you know, that there are some great ones out there, and we've got to be very thankful for them starting interest in the market and bringing sort of an understanding that it's important to be a sustainable organisation. But they don't really provide any incentives to organisations to progress. Everything that they deal with is analysing past performance. So they will analyse and look at what organisations have done and validate them against that. The whole sort of basis of our methodologies, we do analyse what's been done in the past, but we also analyse what people intend to do in the future and can quantify that, because that drives the positive incentives towards it. And what you then had was a huge gap in the middle that didn't really work for 99% of the businesses in our economies, which are SMEs. And to Alex's point, very much when you are, and we're founders, when you're starting a business and you're reporting to your VC investors and you're dealing with the day-to-day and recruiting, it's very easy not to focus on something that is not core business. What we wanted to do is take the intelligence and build it in so it's really easy, really simple, and very affordable for organisations to be able to make everyday business decisions in the most sustainable way.
And so talking about intent there, why do you think it's so important to collect data on intent and not just historic information?
I mean, much of the points that Mike just made, but actually, you know, for a lot of startups and SMEs, again, in particular, and even a lot of very large organisations, they simply don't have the data or the ability to prove what they have been doing previously. We found it really for early stage startups and SMEs, when they're going to investors particularly, they're asked for their financial growth over a period of 3 years, and they're sort of getting investment of what they'll be there, but they're only looking at the sustainability of what they've done, and there's two people sitting around a dining room table that have only existed for 6 months. So the answer is not very much. So actually understanding what people, their intent, and then holding them accountable to that intent and providing them the tools to meet that is hugely useful and hugely valuable for companies. But then on top of that, actually the value of the data that you can collect from intent rather than just past performance, because it's very difficult to correlate that to anything particularly useful to feed back into the system if you can't understand why certain decisions have been successful and valuable. But if you look at what a company wants to do, what time frame they'd like to do within, what time frame they did it within, and the evidence that they have that they did it, and map that against their financial growth, you can start to understand what good decision making looks like. And it's all about taking out that guesswork for companies of should we do this or this. Often that's a very hard question to answer, because it might have a high social impact, might have a low carbon impact, but without really having the data to back up those decisions, it's just opinion. And that's where we're at the moment, is opinion-based decision-making rather than intelligent decision-making.
And to that point, we're in an interesting situation at the moment. So I don't know how many founders of companies, especially VC or private equity-backed companies there are out there. But at the moment, nearly every single financial institution has come up with their own spreadsheet of the questions you have to answer. And I can tell you, when you're going out for a fundraise, I'm sure many of you are aware, you get about 9 of these that you have to fill in. And they're all pretty much the same questions, but phrased in a different way. So the data is not comparable or compatible, and it doesn't look at what you intend to do. So as an early stage company, you're sat there going, yeah, but I want to do it, but I've only existed for a year. How the hell am I going to achieve that in that amount of time, or get that data to you to evidence it? And that's why we don't believe that historic data is always particularly valuable in demonstrating where a company wants to be. And to exactly Alex's point, when you're sat down and judged on your financial forecasts over 3 to 5 years, why can't you be judged on your intent over that 3 to 5 years and be able to quantify it at the same time? And when I was saying about questions being phrased in marginally different ways, any of you who have worked in politics know that you can get multiple different answers to the same question depending on how you phrase it. And that does actually mean that the data at the very end is not really very useful when the answers are phrased in different ways because of the way the question's been posed. Same question, 9 different times by 9 different institutions.
It makes it tricky for people who are buying from as well. So understanding what sort of companies you should be buying from and whether they've made the right decisions is really hard, as Mike said, based on the question that's been asked, depends, that leads to that whole greenwashing conversation. It's really good to have intent, and I think a lot of greenwashing comes from aspirational nature of PR and marketing teams. But it isn't that they don't want to do it, it's just they don't understand what it is that they've said because the wrong questions have been asked. And as a consumer for a lot of things, it's hard to be able to sort of swim through that swamp of information without, again, understanding consistency of data and where they've got to that decision making from. So if you can simplify that, make it easy for a business to understand, which makes it easy for them to communicate, it starts to make that much, much easier.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let's say, for instance, I'm a startup or an SME. How will sustainability and ESG data support me or my business to address some of the sustainability requirements that are now being demanded by regulators, investors, importantly, and customers? So how will the data help me?
Yeah, we found different companies have different pressures, but it's very much a sort of a constant squeeze from all sides of trying to understand what a company's sustainability credentials are. So the presentation before had the sort of the list of reasons why it's good to be sustainable. The regulatory requirements are increasing. Whenever you go out for investment now, you will be asked for your ESG credentials. Customers are requesting it. Your employees want to know what it is that you're doing. Your board, your stakeholders are also asking. So again, it's taking something which is a bit scary, complex, and not necessarily at the core of a lot of businesses, which is the perfect kind of businesses we like to work with. Sustainability and impact isn't necessarily what they do, but we think they have a responsibility to be just and sustainable and responsible organisations, but they need the guidance to get there. So if we can gather that data, we can gather consistent data, it can be analysed and we can feed that back into the system as intelligence. What it gives them is the support and guidance to be able to make decisions and make that communication back out into the world, which makes them arguably more resilient, likely to retain staff, increase sales, remove reputational issues of greenwashing, because they can go back and say, we said we were going to do this, this is the actions we took to do it, and this is why it was a good decision. We now understand the why.
And it's really important from a reputational perspective to understand. As you said, my master's degree, my background is in risk management. And there's been a whole load of sociological studies that have shown that people don't really tend to mind if you're not doing something. As long as you're aware of it, you have a plan to achieve it, you set a time frame, and you've allocated the resources to do it. There's only 2 crimes people hate. One is hypocrisy, saying you're doing something you're not, so greenwashing, and the other one is ignorance. So if it's something that is as prevalent and important to understand as sustainability, and you can't open a newspaper or turn on the news today without hearing about it, there is no excuse for ignorance. And so therefore that providing people with actionable, usable, in-depth data about success and performance and what people have done and the time frame they've managed to achieve it in takes away any excuse for that and makes sustainability an absolute imperative within every business.
It's part of the problem, though. I mean, this is something we've heard quite a lot, that it's just having this standardisation of measurement and reporting. And you've sort of alluded to that in a way here as well, because it's very hard for people to know, for instance, exactly what they should be measuring or reporting if there aren't clear guidelines that are universal across the board. So is that part of the problem?
Very much so, a big part of the problem. But the solution isn't necessarily, again, a government-mandated framework, because, again, that will have holes. I don't know how many of you have read the latest EU taxonomy, but I got halfway through it and started...
I wouldn't recommend it.
So started getting a headache, because that's what happens when bureaucracies create these things. What we require within this is a common understanding of what sustainability is, and that's why we look at those 5 themes. And as I said, just to focus on carbon can be incredibly destructive. Now, we're not saying at all we are absolute advocates for net zero and that happening as soon as possible, but just focusing on that. If you look at it from a sociological level, the the biggest carbon emissions as an individual is how you transport what you eat, how you travel what you eat, and how you heat your house. And it is the lowest socio-economic demographics that have the oldest boilers, the oldest cars, and buy the cheapest food, which normally has the highest carbon footprint. Unless you understand the social drivers of climate change, you're missing the point. Unless you understand the economic drivers of social inequality, you don't really understand it. As that applies to diversity and inclusion, really important, and all of those factors have an influence on how we treat the environment and the climate and where we place priorities. So that first definition of what is sustainability is really important, and we don't have that out there. Then under that, as long as we understand common themes and how to ask the questions, because the same question can have very different outcomes, then there can be some variation. But to be very blunt, because the majority of drivers of data at the moment is the finance industry, having hundreds of finance companies going out there creating their own spreadsheets that they're imposing on small businesses that create the fragmentation of data we have at the moment serves no purpose whatsoever.
I think a big part of what we do is we have indicators that exist across those 5 themes that then had 9 subcategories underneath them, with governance all the way through down to global goals. And actually what's come back a lot is that they are as much educators as they are indicators. So we make an assumption when we're speaking to a lot of organisations that even if we're speaking to a head of sustainability or a CSO, they often have a lot of knowledge in a particular area, but actually understanding inclusion, diversity, social, the economic drivers, climate and environment is a lot for one person to be able to get their head around for a very large, fragmented business that may be global. And actually what that looks like, even inclusion on a global level, is very different to what inclusion is if you've got an office of 50 in London. So that education piece is hugely important. And I think something else that we've spent a long time on is removing the complexity and the jargon out of the language and actually putting it back into layman's terms and very simple points. When we went out and looked at what the world believed to be, or what the world was talking about as sustainability, we went and sort of pooled about 4,500 indicators from random academic studies through to some very well-known ESG measurement tools, some of which are probably here in the last couple of days. And sort of went through those one by one, really dissecting what is it they're asking a business to do and why would this not make sense to a business, and actually really trying to get to the essence and then making that sort of what we believed our standard of sustainability was. Are you doing this? And if you are, it's going to have a positive impact on the communities that you operate in, with and to. So by simplifying it, I think that's part of that, removing the fragmentation and actually getting people to ask the question which will have a valuable answer, then collecting the data around that so that you can help companies in the future answer it and know what it is that they want to get to in the first place.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's no point acquiring data for the sake of it, right? Nobody needs pointless data.
No, but it's amazing how much people ask for. I mean, we work a lot with the finance industry, and I can tell you they ask questions consistently that they have no intention of tracking, looking at the progress of, or really sort of utilising in any valuable way, or feeding back into the company so that they know whether they're making the right decision. So everyone knows that data will be useful. I think there is it's that data to intelligence piece which needs to really mature now, so that everybody knows why they're taking the time, because it can, measuring everything that you do, whether that be your wastewater emissions, your social impact, your economic impact in what you do, is a piece of work. But if you can get value back out of that, and it helps do all of the things like remove reputational risk, as we had in the previous one, and make you more likely to sell, make you more attractive in RFPs and tenders, then it has a value to it. So it makes it worthwhile incorporating it into your business.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? If we do, if you can please put your hand up. Oh, there's one behind you there, Tom. Just while we're waiting there, actually, I've got a question for you. We were in a session yesterday and we were talking, or I asked the question rather, of if sustainability might have fallen down the corporate agenda a little bit in recent years, looking at financial pressures, inflation, recession, talent shortage, the pandemic, geopolitical uncertainty, supply chain disruption. But everybody in the room, bar one dissenting voice, said, oh no, sustainability is still top of the agenda. I wonder what you feel about it from a startup or SME point of view, though. How important? Is it more significant for those kind of smaller organisations than it is for a large organisation?
I think the pressures are different. I think the significance is the same, but the pressures are different. The way that the incentives are being driven at the moment is not necessarily through a certain amount of societal pressure, a certain amount of a desire to do good. But if you look now at, most of you know how the finance cascade works. At the very top of the tree, there are the biggest pension funds and the biggest funds: Norwegian Sovereign Wealth, BlackRock, CalPERS, CalSTRS, Aviva, the people who put the really big chunks in. And that goes down to the banks, which goes to the investment funds, which goes to the VCs. And at the very top, they're saying you will report on this, but they're not offering any consistent guidance on how to do so. So then that's cascading down to the next, who are passing it down to the SMEs. So if you are going out for finance now, and we work with a lot of venture capital and private equity, there is a drive that you have to be able to report against sustainability, but as you rightly said, there's a lack of clarity on exactly how that happens, and it's very fragmented. At the very top, it doesn't stay out of the corporate agenda for very long, because either you end up with the sort of ASOS boohoo type things that come out that puts the jitters to the CEOs and it will come down. But again, and Alex has framed this very well in the past, it tends to be driven by the news. So all of a sudden it's diversity and inclusion after Black Lives Matter, or it's carbon after one of the COP things, and it will skip from one to the other. Yeah. So again, getting that consistent and broad understanding is really important. Well, we don't think it's slipped down the agenda, but we found the drivers, be it financial reporting, responding to public opinion, etc., are very different.
I think it goes back to how you view sustainability as well. If you look at it in very narrow focus, it may not be important, but we were talking of the classic cartoon that came out during COVID of the tsunami wave of COVID hitting businesses, and then behind it the sort of 10 times bigger tsunami of climate change and sustainability. A lot of those crises are caused by issues through social impact, economic impact, inclusion issues, climate change as well. So if it's continued to be ignored, we will continue to have more and more crises which affect businesses, which affect their resilience. So I think we are only getting busier ourselves. A lot of people that we speak to in the industry are only getting busier. And I think that point of view of understanding that sustainability equals resilience is something that's coming through more and more for when we speak to people, but maybe in a slightly different way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's one of the overriding themes that I'm taking away from this event as well. But let's get back to our very patient guest in the audience here. If you just start off, please, by stating your name and where you're from.
So Thomas Poulton from the Macquarie Group, one of the people sending you spreadsheets. It feels like one of the big issue in this space is kind of the lack of genuine network effect. So it's kind of a disaggregation in terms of data schema and kind of collation of data. What do you think will kind of break that and start to pull this all together so that there is a single source of truth?
Personally, I'll go back to the answer I gave before in terms of a consistent understanding of what sustainability is. So what it means to be a sustainable business, and then a consistent understanding of the incentives that sit behind it as well. And that, to me, is really important. People will only ever do things generally within economies if they are legislated or obliged to, so either by the people going to give them money, or because the government says they have to, or because it brings some intrinsic value to them or their business or what it is they want to do. So I think a consistent understanding of what sustainability is, and to exactly what Alex said, these feedback loops, that you don't just collect the data, you feed it back in again, and you allow organisations to develop in a consistent way. And one of the reasons and a big part of what we do, as we said, is when we are helping an organisation understand it and use the indicators as educators, we don't just ask an organisation if they've done something. If they have, we collect the evidence, we validate it against, we have one of the biggest evidence frameworks in the world that will allow us to say, yes, you meet TCFD, you meet this, you meet that, what you're doing corresponds to the stuff that's out there. But if you're not doing something, we don't go bad. What we say is, do you want to? And if you want to, what's the time frame you want to achieve it in? We can quantify that based on ESG hierarchy, and then we feed back in all the tools and assistance to help an organisation achieve it. So suddenly they can, first of all, to offset what Alex said earlier about transition risk, an organisation, we actually have one in Dubai at the moment, was very proud to publish their Future Plus report, even though their climate score was -5. They came in as -5 because their intent within 3 years was 60. And quite rightly, they're going out and saying, yeah, we're bad. we're in Dubai, we don't work in a sustainable business, an industry where sustainability is the output, but having been informed by the indicators, this is our intent, and we now have all the support we need to achieve it. And that means, I can imagine as an investor, if somebody comes to you and it's a good business model, you're going to be going, fair enough, okay, they've got a plan. If they just come out with -5, you're going to go, bad business, we're not going to give you any money. And that to us, if you gear the incentives in the right way, it becomes useful to the business, the feedback loops are in place, and all the tools are provided. And that's what we created in Future Plus. We actually think that we will achieve exactly what you're talking about there.
I think as well, without what we saw was inconsistency within the industry, particularly within the finance industry, and we decided it needed a solution. So we've built one, of trying to get that consistency of data and prove that if you track that data, feed it back, then there is so much value to each person at every level, from consumer to business to investor, that if you we just need to make that solution valuable, and that's sort of what we do.
And just without sort of dominating, the other thing we were trying to get away from was the ambition just being a stamp. I am or I am not sustainable, because nobody's sustainable. We need to become increasingly sustainable, and we need solutions that don't just allow people to rest on their laurels for a few years until they have to be audited again, but allows them to consistently, every day, drive a little incremental change. Because having spent a very long time in the UN, I can tell you there is a very small cadre of very sustainable, moderately sanctimonious businesses that will go to the UN General Assembly in Davos and stand up and congratulate each other for being sustainable. But their solution is not scalable across economies. If entire economies, especially 99% of SMEs, are incentivized to make small incremental changes every day because the tools are provided, then the aggregate that we will achieve will be 1,000 times what we achieve by creating a small, validated cadre of sustainable businesses.
Okay, I've got one more question actually that's come in via the event app. We'll have to just tackle it very quickly though. Very briefly, has the sustainability group applied their own 5 topics to their business, and how did you perform?
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
We do. We publish it. It's in our reports. You can access it on our website. And we are in the top 25% of the businesses in which we've measured. But we're not perfect. And again, because of those compromises, we have made great strides on our climate. But as a small business where we didn't have the options to install, solar panels on the roof and things like that immediately, we've made great strides on it, and we're improving very well. On some of the other areas, we have a little bit of work to do. But most importantly, we feel we've measured it, we publish it, we tell everybody what it is, and we consistently review. And we never publish or give out a policy or a piece of advice to anyone that we haven't applied to ourselves.
Okay, good answer. So you have the intent.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
And the ambition.
And the ambition, thank you. We're going to end it there, actually. I think it's a perfect place to end it. Thank you very much, Mike and Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.